friends. Welcome to episode 56 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, currently in my 13th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself and my interview guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a special welcome this week to listeners Janelle in Georgia, Maggie and Joy in Michigan, and Michelle in New York. I got such a kick of connecting with Jane in New Zealand. Jane is on summer holiday and shared on Twitter that she appreciates the, quote, multitude of informative and inspiring podcasts to listen to while I'm walking my dogs, exercise, PD, and inspiration all in one, end quote. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions, either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include a mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now, for today's episode, Teaching Inquiry and ISTE Certification with Laurie Alden. Laurie and I have crossed digital paths on Facebook groups and Instagram for some time now. Like so many of my interview guests, I wish we were co-workers, and I'm grateful to have a platform and a perfect excuse to have a conversation. Here is Laurie Alden. Listeners, today I'm really excited to be sharing with you as someone who comes to us with a great deal of experience and knowledge, and she's generously agreed to share, and her name is Laurie Alden. And Laurie Alden, let's begin with a question I've been wanting to ask you. You taught in Japan. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I was a junior at Siena College, and I was an accounting major when I realized I did not want to be an accountant. So I decided to join the Air Force out of the blue. Joined the Air Force, ended up in Japan for 4 years. And while I was in the Air Force, I taught conversational English to nursery school students and adults. And as I was looking for resources to teach my students, I walked into our base library and I went into the children's department and I sat on the floor and I started pulling books, and I realized how much I missed children's books. I was in my early 20s and just flipping through them, looking for ways to use these books to teach my students. I realized how much I loved them. So as I was finishing my time in the Air Force, I had to think about, what am I going to do when I get out? And I had really enjoyed working with my younger students and my adults, using books to teach them vocabulary words, concepts, using the illustrations to show them movement and to enhance the vocabulary lessons. And it was at that time I decided I want to be a librarian.
Aw, I love that. Well, first of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. I have a great deal of admiration for people who make the decision to serve our country, and I will leave it at that.
Thank you.
I would love to hear. So, bridge the gap. You left the military and then went back to school, or tell us sort of how did you get from being in the Air Force to I now have a library degree and I teach in a library?
Yes. So when I was in Japan and I had that realization that I wanted to become a librarian, I had already finished my undergraduate work in business. So I had a business degree and I thought, what am I going to do? So I started doing my research, of course, and learned that SUNY Albany had a wonderful Master's in Library Science program, and decided that I was going to come home and start school full time and become a librarian. But at that time, I thought, I think I want to work in a university library, because even though I really enjoyed those picture books, I love the idea of doing research, real research. So I came back and I was accepted into the MLS program at SUNY Albany. I went full time, and during my first semester there, I had some conversations with people who were pursuing their school media certification. And I thought, well, don't you just read to students in elementary school? Like, that's exciting, but I want to do research. And they informed me and educated me all about the changes in the expectations of what school librarians do in an elementary school.
Well, on behalf of those of us who spent the last 13 years in the elementary school library, thank you. Because indeed, I think most school librarians have encountered this sort of, ignorance. This people are unaware, and I've said to listeners before when I've been asked why I needed a master's degree to scan books, and so yes, I think we've all encountered those moments where we get just a wee bit defensive about what we do for a profession. So I completely agree. I wanted to. I guess I will say how fortunate that you could dive into library school, because I was one of those folks who took one class at a time as I was raising 3 children under the age of 6. And so, yes, it was my brain. It was my sanity break. It was my reminder that I had a brain. And I was very grateful for that. But the idea of being able to just invest that kind of time in becoming a school librarian, and what a wonderful opportunity. So tell us, when you got your degree, you have been in elementary school this whole time. So tell us, obviously you did not decide to go into the university in academics, but how did you make that transition and become elementary library media specialist?
When I was at SUNY Albany, I had a fellowship and I worked in the dean's office. And one of my jobs was to input on a listserv all of the job openings. So after that first semester, I had changed my program so that I could pursue my library media specialist certification. And at that point, I was very lucky that my mom, I grew up in libraries. My mom was a library aide in a public library for years, but then she moved to an elementary library in Hudson Falls, which is a school district close to our school district. Once I decided I wanted to pursue this, I would visit her library. And she would let me come in and I could read to students, I could talk to students and just get a feel of what it would be like to be a school librarian. And at that point, I knew I wanted to be with younger students. I loved their enthusiasm, and I was beginning to see and learn how much I could teach those students and involve them with the research process, which has always been my main focus and excitement about this job. So as I was inputting those job openings, I saw one for the South Glens Falls School District, which is where I live. And I thought, how amazing. This position was for a library media specialist / enrichment teacher. I was a little unsure about that piece, but I thought it was interesting. So I called the district and I spoke to the superintendent at that time and explained my situation. I still have one whole semester left, but I was very interested. I told him about my background and how I sort of came to be back in New York in this position, and he asked me to come meet with him. So I went and I met with him, and he told me about the program, and he explained that they didn't really know what the library program could be, but they wanted to be something really exciting where the students wanted to come into the library.
Wow. It sounds like you were, I think many librarians find that they're sort of at the right place at the right time. And it does take a certain amount of courage to jump when that opportunity strikes. I think that anytime opportunities come your way, you're sort of that natural hesitation. But how fun that you had that inside track and had an opportunity to see, you're going to just pick and choose which job you decided to. Forgive me, did you even post that job? I mean, when you encountered the job, did you sort of like tuck it away in your pocket and say, oh, mine?
I will admit, I did wait until I called the superintendent and then I posted it, but it was the same day. But I did wait about an hour.
Nice. So tell us about your current position that you have right now. It sounds like a dream job.
I have to say I'm very lucky. I am in the South Glens Falls School District in New York, and we have 4 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school. When I first started 19 years ago, I was hired to teach in 2 elementary schools. From the day I was hired, myself and the other librarians in the district worked very hard to advocate for one elementary librarian in every elementary school. And it took about 6 or 7 years, but they did make that decision to place one elementary librarian in every elementary school, which was a huge step, as I'm sure you're aware, for a district to make that step.
Well, and the district obviously would only have made that step if they could look at what you are currently doing and recognize the potential that you have when you secure those positions in every building. I think that that is a slow process because districts don't turn on a dime, and their budgets oftentimes are such that you have to play the long game when you're talking to your administration.
Absolutely. And all of the librarians in the district were very much committed to doing anything and everything we could do to be seen. We volunteered to present at board meetings. We joined every committee that we had in the district just to be seen and heard. And we made sure that we attended events that were held at school so parents saw us and could make that connection between who we are and what we contribute into the program itself.
Sure. I know that now, and earlier this season, I interviewed Amanda Jones about using social media to also broadcast your presence and make your footprint on their child's academic experience even more relevant, because you can use social media to do some of that work for you when you make sure that the families see just how integral what is happening in the library is to their students' academic achievement. Can I ask you, when you're going about your career, and at some point you decided to pursue an ISTE certification, and, what was that sort of lightning bolt moment where you said, this is something I want to dedicate time to?
Absolutely. Last school year, in the fall, I was doing a lot of work taking my curriculum, the lessons that I teach to my students, the units that I do, and looking at the new AASL standards, and also looking at the ISTE standards sort of in the background. I am very lucky that we have a BOCES school library system, and they have offered so many great opportunities for me to learn about our standards. So having those experiences, I was really taking the time to look at how am I teaching in a way that I'm helping my students meet the standards. And I noticed there were so many intersections between the ISTE standards and the AASL standards. And not only that, but I noticed that as librarians, we are already doing so much to help our students meet the ISTE standards. So I had seen Shannon Miller had shared an email through the Future Ready Library page about the ISTE certification process. So I did a little, research and read about it, and I contacted our tech integration specialist, who's very supportive of the library program. And I asked, would the district support me pursuing this? Because it's expensive, and I knew I didn't want to pay for this myself, but it was so beneficial.
Can you give us an idea of the cost? Because I think that approaching your administration with this and making a good case for why this would benefit you as somebody in their district. So how did you do that? First of all, can I ask what it does cost, the process? What kind of investment does this require on the part of your time? And how did your district respond?
The cost at the time was $600. It was the first round. It is now, I believe, $750. And when I went to the tech integration specialist, she fully supported it. And our district actually used the ISTE standards to develop our technology curriculum. And the librarians in the district were a part of that. So the district understood that we were invested in these standards and incorporating them into our program. And I think for the district, they saw that they had an educator who wanted to pursue this certification to be able to bring this back and do something to benefit our students and other teachers. So immediately they approved it, and I was on my way to beginning the process.
I love that. And the nice thing, it wasn't just it wasn't an uphill battle for you because your district already had that kind of buy-in. I think that for many of us, unless we realize that there are other people who are also following the ISTE standards, you might not recognize that, you sort of a larger number of you might be able to bring to bear on your district and have a larger voice. So I really think that's fantastic. Tell me what, when you were doing this, when you were going through this process, I imagine that it gave you a better opportunity to look at what we do, our profession, in a whole new light.
Absolutely. When you look at the ISTE standards, and you read through them, and you really do see the expectations of those standards are very much embedded into our AASL standards. Mm-hmm. When I started the process, one of the most eye-opening pieces of this process was our first 2-day on-site training.
Yeah, I did realize I forgot to ask you what in terms of the time commitment. So do walk us through the time commitment, because I think that librarians, like many educators, look at their own time and say, I don't see how I could possibly manage to fit this in.
Yes. One reason I felt that I could fit this in is because so much of the work I needed to do, I was already doing. I just needed to formalize it. So when the process started, and I believe it's the same now, you have 2 days of on-site training. I was very lucky that it was offered only 45 minutes from my house in Albany. And we had a rep from ISTE, and she was there with a cohort of us. So it was myself, there were administrators, building administrators, district administrators, tech integration specialists, classroom teachers, makerspace teachers. So such a great variety of educators that coming together on those 2 days, was so eye-opening to hear how others are using the ISTE standards or wanting to use them. And it was eye-opening for some of the building principals and other administrators to see how many librarians were there and wanting to learn more to bring that back to grow their program.
Well, and I have to think that if you have, I didn't appreciate the array of educators you would have in an ISTE certification, and that administrators, even ones who are not in your district, would then say, whoa, school librarians getting their ISTE certification, and then take that back to their own districts. Sort of the rising tide lifts all boats. The exciting thing is, while your district recognizes the importance of you getting your ISTE certification, not everyone in neighboring districts getting this for their, say, admin or their classroom teachers would necessarily recognize the potential benefit to getting your school librarian also ISTE certified.
I agree, absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important when you have these opportunities to attend training, when there will be a mix of professionals there, different educators, administrators, because it does open people's eyes and see, the possibilities.
Can you tell us a little bit about the modules and the portfolios? Because
Yes.
I think everyone's hesitation once you get over the money issue is, but what do I have to do?
Absolutely. After the 2-day on-site training, we worked with a smaller cohort from the larger cohort in an online portal. And every 2 weeks, we had a new topic. So there were 4 topics. And so we spent 8 weeks, 2 weeks on each topic. And it would always begin with some professional reading. So we might read some articles and read through some websites about personalized learning. And then there would be a discussion based on what we read. How do you see that you have incorporated personalized learning into your curriculum? Or now that you've read this, how do you see that you could do this? So there would be discussion, and then we'd have to create something. Perhaps we create a lesson plan or an anchor chart. But I have to say, one reason this was manageable is because everything I created and used in my own program. It was real. It was meaningful.
Sure. It wasn't sort of hypothetical. I know when I talked last week to Patrick Taylor, I mentioned that my experience in library school was entirely hypothetical because as a stay-at-home mom, I didn't have the opportunity to then turn around and use everything I had just learned in a very real and immediate experience. So I really think that has the practical application of being able to do this, it sort of reinforces the idea of that this is definitely time well spent. Could I ask about the portfolios? You did have to submit work, obviously digitally, but back up, were the people in your cohort all school librarians, or they were it was a hybrid group of educators?
It was wonderful. There were some school principals, a makerspace teacher, some other school librarians, a district administrator. So as we're having these discussions, we get all different perspectives. And that was so interesting too, because as we continue to want to advocate for our programs, hearing the perspective of other administrators gave me great insight in how to bring information back to my administrators. What do they know? What do they want to know? Or what do they need to know about our programs?
Sure. And then you sort of, again, raising the profile of the school librarian in a mixed group of educators really only benefits everybody living in your immediate community. I really want to ask, when you mentioned using the SAMR model with your students, could you give us sort of briefly run through that and how it drastically improved the way you teach?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because our tech integration specialist had introduced the SAMR model to us the year before. But it was just one of those extra pieces that I tucked away, didn't really look at, and didn't think about how it could impact my instruction. So the SAMR model, as we know, is you have the first level, which is substitution. So that's basically just using technology to replace something else.
Paper and pencil, yeah.
Exactly. So my students, instead of writing their poem on paper, might use a Google Doc. Augmentation is now we're adding some different functionality. So maybe now they are, changing font and sharing it with someone. So they're adding a little bit of functionality. And a modification is where, we're really changing that task. So when I conference with students during inquiry and they're using a Google Doc, well, now I'm able to go in and comment, and we're able to have some great dialogue and change the whole interface of our conferencing. And then the redefinition is just really taking whatever I'm teaching and really just completely adding more functionality, adding a greater significance to the role that technology plays in the learning process. As I looked at the SAMR model amongst the discussion with the other educators and really then working with it within my own classroom, wow, how powerful. I keep a picture of it near my computer, and I'm always looking at it as I'm planning because I think, okay, here's a new piece of technology. It's fun, it's flashy, it's cool, but is it really going to enhance, modify, change, and make for a better learning experience for my students?
It sounds like the SAMR model and your ISTE certification give you a new lens to look through, because you already you're doing this job, but now you sort of have this additional layer which you apply to everything, and it gives you an opportunity to rethink how you're going to use this and how your students are going to benefit.
Absolutely. And when I created my portfolio and looking at the SAMR model and all of the standards I had learned about and unpacked and thought about how that impacted my instruction, as I worked through my portfolio, I needed to create an artifact for every piece of the ISTE standards for educators. And although that is a time commitment and it's a challenge, also everything I had created along the way, I was able to take, and with that new lens, new perspective of the SAMR model, take that and transform it into a really powerful artifact that aligned with the standards. So when I finished creating that portfolio that I needed to submit to receive my certification, just walking through the process of creating that portfolio was transformative for me as an educator. I had to look at myself in such a critical way. I took a lot of my lessons and ideas and really set them aside and thought, I need to move forward. I need to take what I've learned and allow it to change my instruction, the resources I use, and the way I model behaviors for my students. One of my favorite pieces of the ISTE standards is the empowered student. And I really looked closely at, how do I empower my students by modeling these behaviors for my students?
Sure. So it sounds like in order to pursue this, it would need to happen during the school year. Do you have a defined timeline, or is it one based on when you finish submitting your modules?
I believe you have 6 months from the time you complete the modules to submit your portfolio.
Wonderful. I know I want to shift gears, but I would say, what advice would you give to school librarians who are looking at this and they're listening to what you have to say? What kind of advice would you give to them considering going through the ISTE certification process?
I would say if you are really serious about growing as a professional, growing your program, and providing your students the absolute best instruction, if you have the time to commit, then do it. It has been so beneficial to me. And I would also say, as you're working through those modules, keep everything you create in a folder. Because when you get to that portfolio, you're going to go back to all of those lesson plans or anchor charts, everything you've created, and that is going to make creating that portfolio so much easier and much less time consuming.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that because I know that administrators are always looking for how educators are bettering themselves. And I think that there's something to be said for having opportunities other than going back to graduate school. That is unfortunately an expensive option. This sounds like a way that you can invest in yourself, which there's a good chance your district will pay for. And I would hope that anybody considering this would definitely take a look. Friends, we're also going to include some links in the show notes, so make sure that you visit, and that way you can take a look at the requirements yourself. Shifting gears, could you tell us, you obviously are a fan of research, and as somebody who has taught elementary, I find that teaching research and inquiry is really, it does look very different than you would say at the middle school or the high school level. So could you tell us about your inquiry-based instruction, especially in your day-to-day practice?
Absolutely. I have to say, inquiry is my passion. I, again, so lucky to have our school library system. The past 20 years, I've received amazing professional development on different inquiry models. And from day one, after I learned about inquiry with primary students, I grabbed a hold of it and I ran. The way I approach inquiry at the elementary level begins right in kindergarten. In kindergarten, I introduce students to my Wonder Grid. The Wonder Grid is something I created many years ago, and it's simply some framed question words like why, how, what that are displayed on the wall in my library. And I reference those words almost every class, and it could be I read a book to students, and then I say something like, I wonder why the character did that. And I'm always sharing with students that the best way to learn is to share what you're curious about, what you're wondering about, by asking good questions. So I feel strongly that inquiry starts day one, where we tell students it's okay to share what you're curious about, to ask questions. I get more formal, and I'm actually in the process of doing this right now, where I introduce students to the first step of inquiry, and that is I wonder. In kindergarten and even in first grade, as we are exploring a topic, students learn to write questions using the wonder words. And this is where it becomes more formalized and scaffolding and working toward a true inquiry research process. By learning to write questions or draw questions, and to learn that this is your first step toward learning about a topic.
Can I ask you, just sort of selfishly, because you made me think of something, the challenge I face a great deal with my, say, second graders and my third graders is they all too often gravitate towards what they already know. And so when the teacher gives them an opportunity to investigate or do a genius hour, they default to the things that they feel comfortable with because in their head they are, fascinated with lions or dinosaurs, or they love learning about dogs or cats. And it's so easy for this, and I think adults tend to do this. We feel comfortable with what we know the most. How do you get students to feel comfortable wondering about things and investigating things about which they know nothing?
Yes, that's an interesting question and something I think many librarians struggle with and classroom teachers. I like to share with students my curiosities. I like to model for students how much I don't know. And I will share with students, I was walking out of my house today, and on the side of my house, I saw this bug. And I'm really curious about what it is. But to be able to figure it out, I need to ask some questions and try to figure out where I can find this information. Or I might say, I'm going to be taking a trip and I need to know some things that I don't know about. I think it's so important for our students to see and understand that we don't know everything, and that when we can learn about something new, that learning, because it's all new, is so much more enjoyable. I always preface to a lot of my older students, you can choose any topic, but if you choose a topic you already know, this process is going to be very boring, because through this inquiry, through this genius hour, you're going to be exploring a topic and needing to define a search strategy and figure out some information. If you already know all of this, it is not going to be enjoyable. So I think constantly sharing what you don't know, allowing them to explore, sites like Wonderopolis, or just giving them tons of great resources to explore and see what's out there.
Right. I oftentimes when we do research, I don't ask them what they want to learn about. I first of all put them on, say, World Book for Kids or Britannica, and just give them an opportunity to explore, and then talk to them about what they might like to learn about. And I sometimes give them the recommendation, go weird. I want you to go weird. And when you give them that safety, that permission to say, I want to learn about an axolotl, or, all of a sudden they do that. Can you, I really was interested to ask you, about not too long ago, you posted on social media about students curating their own sources during the research process. And as a control freak, I sort of shuddered. I was like, what? So what do you mean when you say that students should be able to curate their own resources?
Absolutely. That is one of the shared foundations that I appreciate so much in our new AASL standards. I absolutely believe when students work through the inquiry process, starting with asking their own questions to be able to solve the big problem or answer the essential question, when it comes to the resources, because the student is in control of their inquiry process, they need to be in control of creating their own search strategy. And I know this is challenging. It's challenging for me to let go. But I do feel my students learn best when they are creating their own search strategy and, fumbling their way through it, especially if they have a topic, like you just said, which is really cool and weird. Because there are times when my students look in our card catalog, look in our online catalog, and they do not find a book. They search the databases and maybe they find an article or two, and then they need to go dun 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 to the internet. But what a wonderful opportunity to work with those students on, okay, now we need to go on the internet. Before we do that, let's have a refresher on how we evaluate websites. Now, depending on the age of the student, if I had a second grader, I would not say, go out to Google. I would say, let's work together to identify keywords that will help you find your topic when we search in a search engine. And I might use something like Kittle. And allow them to do some searches and see what they find. But what a meaningful experience for them to truly be searching for something they need and be using those skills of safe searching, identifying keywords, and evaluating websites.
Well, and I think in that respect, having a librarian standing over their shoulder during the research process is also key. Having that opportunity to guide them while they're actively searching. I model safe searching. I model how to dissect these websites and look for age and author and, is this an authoritative source? And I do that, but I also am cognizant I am not going to be standing over their shoulders when they do their research process. So I think I like the idea of doing this, but being more hands-on while they're searching.
Yes, I have to say that I am lucky, although I have a fixed schedule. My classes meet once a week for 45 minutes, and I also have enrichment groups that I meet with. But I do have slots of time where I will say to the teachers I'm working with, I will be pushing into your classroom when the students are working on their inquiry. So for example, I just started a 3rd grade culture inquiry unit with 2 3rd grade teachers. I've already blocked out 30 minutes every Tuesday to push in. And I will be in there, and the teachers and I have worked closely, and they have learned the way I teach students to evaluate websites, to select keywords, to use databases first. So because we've formed this relationship as co-teachers, even if they're with those classroom teachers, I feel confident they're hearing the same message.
I want to dig into that because the idea that you can, I think that's really the bonus of being able to co-teach, because as somebody on a fixed schedule, I have for the past 13 years tried to educate my teachers through my students. So I will teach a strategy to my students, but the teachers aren't there to see what I'm doing. And so there is that disconnect that I'm hoping what I hammer home during a lesson in the library will bleed into what happens when the students are back in the classroom. And, as one might do when the teacher walks in, I'll have that on the smart board so that they can see. I sort of give a finger over and I say, listen, this is what we're working on, so that when you have this opportunity with your students, here are the places we're going. And I launch always from the school homepage, so we have that sort of consistency of message. But without the benefit of having a co-teaching opportunity built in, I think all too often a fixed schedule doesn't accommodate for obviously the benefits of this co-teaching. Surely your administrators see the advantage when those teachers then gush about the things that are made possible because you are also in the classroom with them.
Yes, and full disclosure, this type of co-teaching experience doesn't happen with every grade level. Just this past week, I had a student come in to look for a book about clarinets. And I asked them, have you looked in any of the databases, looked at any websites? And the student said, well, my teacher sent me to Google. So I still have the same experiences. I am very lucky that my principal gives me the time to present at faculty meetings. I also created a Google Classroom just for my teachers because I felt that I was sending out so many emails of check this out, do this, this is what I'm doing. Instead, I sort of curated everything in a Google Classroom so that I share out, and when I share something new, the teachers get a little email that says, hey, check out Google Classroom. But still, there are those teachers who still think, do a quick search on Google. It's fine, it's good. And even though their students have received all the instruction, I send out reminders, I share, it still happens, and that is just one of our unfortunate realities of being librarians, isn't it?
Right. Well, and by the same token, when I teach the students research skills, I'm hoping we're teaching their parents as well, and that's very ambitious because the idea of this messaging getting home to the families is something I am trying to work on. Can I ask you, in addition to inquiry-based learning, I've noticed that STEM also fares very prominently in your library program. Could you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I really enjoy incorporating STEM because I find that there is so much questioning and inquiry skills embedded into it. I teach enrichment groups as well as my library classes, and the students I work with are those students reading above grade level, high achieving students, and I'm always looking for ways to engage them in some different activities, and not only those enrichment groups but also in library. I find that when I bring in STEM, I'm able to pull in some of those great ISTE standards that I love so much. One is computational thinking, which goes along with coding so nicely in that sequential, sequencing of actions that we teach when we teach coding. Also pulling in the design learning plan into my library classes and into my enrichment, which really helps students to, give them a problem and have them use the design learning process to walk through that problem and have to evaluate perhaps a model they created to help solve a problem, to the brainstorming skills, the critical thinking skills, then building with their hands. So often our students, they are online building and coding, but building with their hands and creating something from their own idea and planning it out and then constructing it with their hands, I think is so beneficial, and they gain so much from that.
Well, and I think rather than us telling them something, that when they go through that process, those ideas become more organic, and the kids come upon those questions more naturally because they have a more hands-on approach. Am I correct? You have a makerspace in your library program. Could you tell us a little bit about how that works with the classes that you teach and when you're working with young students?
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate that my district funds my makerspace. About 6 or 7 years ago, the district purchased a 3D printer, and that sort of kick-started it. It was this new, cool, fun thing. And after we received that, I started attending some professional development about what a makerspace can be. And I was so pleased to learn that it can be anything from having paper scraps there to make bookmarks and origami and coloring sheets all the way up to 3D printing. The way I incorporate makerspace into my library is I am lucky enough to have 2 45-minute open makerspace slots in my schedule. Students are open and welcome to come to the makerspace. They understand when they come that they are there to be respectful, responsible students, and they are there to tinker. They will pull things out. We have things like Ozobots, little robots they can code with colored markers. They can use the Osmos, which attach to an iPad so they can do tanagrams, they can work on their numbers or draw something or code, all the way to Legos. I have groups of boys and girls that come in, my first fifth graders. They don't want anything to do with the technology. They come in and they want to build and talk with their friends. I also use this in my library classes. So perhaps for one of our global read-alouds last school year, we read a beautiful book called Wild Berries, and the students constructed, using the 3D pens, a berry basket that could hold so many berries. And they had to use the design thinking model to plan it out as a group and learn to work together as a group. And sketch it out, think about the dimensions, and then actually use a 3D pen, and how slowly they move would allow them to build it thicker or thinner, and was it stable enough to hold the berries. So I can take pieces of my makerspace and use it in my library classes for a STEM lesson, or some tech lesson. But what I love about the makerspace is I am hands off. Students will come in and they tinker, and they'll say, "Mrs. Alden, how do I do this?" And I'll say, "I don't know. Just try. And eventually they get it. Sometimes they give up, but sometimes they get it."
Well, and I think that we have, I know that educators have been accused of not giving our students enough time, enough safe places to fail. We don't give them an opportunity to develop grit, to experience frustration in a way that's safe and encourages them to become more determined to follow through on something they're hoping to accomplish. You mentioned the Global Read Aloud, and just off top, just selfishly, how many years have you participated in the Global Read Aloud?
This is only my second year.
Okay.
I always felt too overwhelmed with everything I was doing to participate. And then 2 years ago, I went to a conference and I heard Pernille Rip speak.
She's amazing.
She's amazing. And the moment she first opened her mouth to speak, I said, "I have to do this. Why am I not doing it?" And last school year, I decided to jump in. So we read Amal Unbound with my fifth graders. And
the audiobook is phenomenal. I can speak to the audiobook. It was just captivating.
Such a great book. And then we use the picture books for our younger students. But what I really loved about it was the conversations that it started. And Pernille Rip is quoted as saying that she started this because she wanted students to care about other students that are not like them. But to be able to care for them, they need to learn about them and know there are people around the world that are different from us, but some of those people are really similar to us too. And I have to say, reading Amal Unbound with my fifth graders was amazing last year. I had students come back every week and say, "I need another book like Amal Unbound."
Okay. Well, we'll get right on that. Well, that's another search. I will say I have looked into Global Read Aloud. I know Pernille Rip. I don't know. I was very fortunate to see her speak in person, and she's just an incredible font of ideas and resources and positive energy. But I know her Global Read Aloud has wonderful resources that are made available, and I'll attach a link in the show notes. Please let me know. I think that folks might want to follow you on social media. You are a teacher paid teacher producer of content, and I think that listeners would love to be able to follow you and learn more about your programs.
Oh, absolutely. I am on Instagram at Cozy Book Nook Librarian. I'm also on Twitter as Ms. Alden Library, MS Alden Library. And I do have a TPT store, and that's Cozy Book Nook Librarian. I'm very new at TPT, and I'm not... I end up giving so many things away. So as people are on TPT and they're marketing and showing off what they create, I tend to interact with people on Instagram, and I'll say, "I have to send this to you." And these wonderful librarians will say, "Well, no, I'll buy it." And I'll say, no, let me send it to you. I want you to have it. So the majority of my resources are inquiry-based. I use the WISER model, which starts with wonder. And then I have many resources on how to create a search strategy, and that's my investigate. And then I do a lot of work with synthesizing. How do we get our youngest students to understand what it means to synthesize? And so I use a lot of puzzle pieces and visuals that show students that you take everything you just learned about your topic, and let's see if we can put it together and make a new understanding, a new picture of our topic and what we now know about it. And then I do some work with curating too. But yeah, I have fun creating some products and sharing them with other librarians. And I think it's in the true essence of librarians to share. It's who we are.
I know that when folks shop on TPT, it is oftentimes at a moment of desperation. I think that folks, when they go to TPT, and I listen to a lot of librarians who are very new to this profession and, just absolutely wanting in the worst way to be good at what we do right away. And if you can get those ideas from a seasoned expert like yourself, somebody who has invested the time in learning how to do inquiry, especially with our youngest patrons, I say all the more power to you, and you are providing us with a great service. Likewise, this podcast is available for anybody who would like to invest in themselves. And I really can't thank you enough for sharing this time with me and with our listeners. I know that all too often we get so bogged down in our day-to-day that we forget to look out from our libraries and recognize that there are ways that we can improve what we're doing. So thank you so much, Laurie.
Well, thank you for having me on your podcast. This was such a pleasure to be asked, because when I first discovered your podcast, I felt like I found a bag of gold, because so often I listen to other podcasts that are not directly related to librarians. And although I learned so much and I enjoy them, what a treasure to have your podcast where I can look and choose one that is meaningful to me at this time.
Well, and as somebody who clearly likes her curating, you just go ahead. You curate, and when you see a podcast episode that you think other people would like to share, you just share it out with all those New York librarians that you're friends with. And, I think that librarians tend to be very considerate, and they want to help each other out. And if your resources helps librarians and my resources help librarians, we're both on the right track here.
I agree.
Have a great rest of the weekend, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
You too. I'd like to thank Laurie for sharing her ISTE experiences and strategies for infusing inquiry into our lessons. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The topic of our next episode will be Adulting 101, Life After High School. I hope you will tune in.